So today we will be getting to our second session of the Compassion, Fatigue, Resilience series. Today will be about reframing. Just a disclaimer before we get going, this presentation was prepared for the Pacific Southwest MHTTC. We are funded through SAMHSA. Couple things, anything here in the presentation, except those things directly from copyrighted sources, which you'll see citations, is in the public domain and may be reproduced as well as copied without permission from SAMHSA. We'd also like to let you know that the opinions and things expressed here are by the presenter. They do not represent the opinions of SAMHSA or CARS or the Pacific Southwest Mental Health Treatment Center. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Pacific Southwest Mental Health Treatment Center, Technology Transfer Center, we are part of a national network of technology transfer centers. And we serve SAMHSA's Region 9, which includes the U.S. Pacific Islands, Hawaii, Arizona, Nevada, and California. You'll notice on your screen that each region has 3 different colored boxes. The blue boxes represent the addiction TTCs, the green boxes are the prevention TTCs, and the orange boxes, which includes our center, are the mental health TTCs. As many noted in the chat box, not everyone is from Region 9. However, we are delighted to have you with us, and we hope you will continue to access and share our resources. Also, if you haven't connected yet with your specific region's TTC and you would like to, let us know, and we're happy to connect you with them as well. There will also be a link in the follow-up reminder that can help you locate your TTC. Okay. Our goal, the Pacific Southwest MHTTC provides training, technical assistance, and resources to support the mental health and school mental health workforce in our region to adopt and implement evidence-based practices across the mental health continuum of care. Here's an overview of our services. We offer no-cost support to the mental health field through webinars like this session today, as well as through coaching, consultation, resources and tools, and virtual trainings, which all of our on-site events right now are on hold, as you might imagine, due to COVID. All right. So important to note, MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all of our activities. You'll see some sort of buzzwords here on the screen. We hope that our language is respectful, healing-centered, trauma-responsive. We ask that you think about these particular values on here and apply them to our dialogue today. It is important that we're non-judgmental, we avoid assumptions, and just be respectful, help make the environment comfortable for everyone. Okay, today's presenter. Today, we're with Joel D. Jackson. He serves as a subject matter expert for several programs at the Chicago Center for HIV Elimination. Through Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation of Greater Chicago, Joel serves as a racial healing practitioner. In this role, he co-facilitates racial healing circles across Chicagoland, helping to provide space for healing and connection and to reaffirm the humanity in all of us. He's also the UChicago Medicine Assistant Director of Inclusion and Training for the Urban Health Initiative Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. He coordinates the hospital's cultural competence training strategy and is the lead facilitator for the UChicago Medicine Cultural Competence course. Joel is also helping coordinate the hospital's resilience-based care training strategy, which will include a focus on compassion, fatigue, resilience, and a focus on trauma-informed care. He's a certified compassion fatigue professional and the 2020 Staff Diversity Leadership Award recipient for the University of Chicago. Thank you, Joel, for being with us.
Thank you, Tiara, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this session. Before I get started with the content on Compassion, Fatigue, Resilience Part 2, a focus on reframing, I would like to invite all of you to complete the professional quality of life measurement tool, which will give you an opportunity to assess your level of compassion satisfaction or resilience and work satisfaction, your level of burnout, the level of negative effect that your work environment has upon you, as well as your level of secondary traumatic stress, the negative effects caused by your interaction with suffering in your patient care. Because when it comes to compassion, I define that as the ability to sort of suffer with someone or stepping into someone else's suffering. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and the handout that says ProQual 1 is the tool that you would use. There's about 30 questions for you to answer on there. And so I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes to complete it right now. So you can begin. All right, so for our agenda today, I'm going to first go over objectives and norms. Then we will look at a few definitions related to compassion fatigue. I'll invite you to watch a video, a 2 minutes of a video called When Helping Hurts. Then we're going to discuss the causes and effects of stress. We're going to revisit part 1 from last week on self-regulation and practice some new self-regulation exercises, or at least one new self-regulation exercise. Then we're going to approach the topic of reframing and practice some activities regarding reframing, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. Okay, so our objectives for today, we're going to define secondary traumatic stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue. We're going to describe the causes and effects of stress, and describe and practice techniques for reframing. In terms of our operating agreement, we're going to use the PRIDE acronym. The P stands for participation, so I just ask that you do your best to stay present and eliminate distractions. The R is for respect, so I ask that you actively listen and trust the process. Stick with me until the end. I is for integrity, so if you hear something that doesn't vibe very well with you, or if you read something in the comments, questions, or any of the boxes that does not vibe very well with you, assume that whoever delivered the message did not intend to cause any harm, and that could help with moving forward. For diversity, we want to remain open to learning, even if we hear ideas that are different from our own, and it's an opportunity for us to work on suspending judgment. Judgment is something that we all do. We can't navigate the world without judging differences. At the same time, when we have opportunities like this, we can use our filters, and I always say that what comes up in the head does not have to come out through the mouth or through our typing. We can be intentional about what we say. And then lastly, the E is for excellence, which I ask you to accept the challenge to gently lean into discomfort. When we're in our comfort zones, there's nothing pressing us to learn anything new. At the same time, through this session, you will be broadening your awareness, receiving information, and perhaps even taking action by participating in the chat box or the polls to hopefully stretch you away from your comfort zone. The purpose of the norms is to provide a container around the experience so that no one feels fear or threat, because when we feel fear or threat, we naturally retreat back to our comfort zones where no new learning can take place. So if I have your commitment to the norms as stated, you can signify that by raising your hand or just commenting a yes in the comments box. Great, I see a lot of hands raised. I see a bunch of yeses in the comments box. So I'm going to accept that as an invitation to move forward. And if you do not agree, speak now or forever hold your peace, or you are more than welcome to choose to decline from attending today's session. All right, so let's move forward. So for the first part of the first poll that I want to ask you all, I want you to look at this scale, and you can see the scale is from 1 to 10, 1 being low stress zone, 10 being high stress zone, or if you think about it in terms of high self-compassion versus hard on yourself, what I want you to do is answer the first poll on a scale of 1 to 10 and answer according to which number represents where you are between high self-compassion and being hard on yourself. And the second part, what I want you to do is explain why you chose the number that you chose. Remember, 1 is high self-compassion and 10 is hard on yourself. And so I see we have 1, 2. Most people are between 6 and 7. We have a couple of 9s as well. And some of the reasons you marked yourselves where you did, definitely more compassionate of others than myself. It comes and goes depending on the days and stresses. You're working on it, or I expect more of myself. I'm definitely more compassionate of others than myself. I'm a perfectionist. I have tough days and easier days. To whom much has been given, much shall be required. It's a learning process. I'm learning to be compassionate with myself. Okay? And I love myself. I think I'm great, but fairly often I do not. And hopefully, as you are reading these comments, and as you notice where people mark themselves on the scale, you can see that you're not alone. One of the results of compassion fatigue is a feeling of isolation in these sort of negative aspects of our work and being hard on ourselves, and we tend to think that we are alone in that experience. Well, hopefully from this activity you see that none of us are alone. And for you, that may be where you are today, but on any given day, it could fluctuate. It can go up to, being very hard on yourself, or can go down to being very high in self-compassion for yourself. So keep that in mind, because as I said on part 1, if you weren't here, one of the things I said is one of the greatest tools that we'll have to use in mitigating and managing compassion fatigue is each other. And part of that is because we all are human and we all have similar experiences with this. Okay, so next what I want to do is invite you to watch a video. It's a snippet from a video called When Helping Hurts. It's a DVD, actually. And in this one, you're going to watch a fireman and a clinician discuss their stress responses as a result of their intense work. So, if you would click on the video link on the screen, and it will link you to the video, and you should be able to watch it for 2 minutes. Seems that most people are finished with the video. So I admit the video is somewhat dated. At the same time, tragedies always are occurring, and that can make somewhat of the video somewhat relatable. There are hurricanes, mass disasters, fires, all of these things that are constantly happening in our world. There are a couple of takeaways from that 2-minute video. First, there's the one-legged man who's sort of happily dancing, right? And the idea is that if he can find joy and still be able to dance in the middle of, whatever happened, then the rest of us should be able to find joy as well. And then there's also the quote by John Wilson, where he said, "It's important to counterbalance the intensity of the work you do." And that's an important quote to consider as we move forward through today's session on reframing, because the idea isn't to completely remove the intensity, but to sort of balance it out or counterbalance it with perhaps reframing and self-regulation, for example. So quickly, just want to go over this definition of compassion fatigue in case anyone wasn't able to join us last week. As you can see on the screen, it says secondary traumatic stress plus burnout equals compassion fatigue. And we define secondary traumatic stress as emotional distress resulting from exposure to another's trauma. At the same time, the symptoms of secondary traumatic stress are the same symptoms of trauma, and many of us have experienced trauma in our lives that may have gone unresolved or untreated, or may be sort of triggered into a PTSD moment. So my point is, it's not just secondary traumatic stress, but it's traumatic stress in general added to burnout that can create this sense of compassion fatigue. And the definition of burnout, as you can see, is the chronic condition of perceived demands outweighing perceived resources. So burnout is primarily a perception problem. So it's not the external events that create burnout. It's actually whether we perceive the events as demands or threats, and how we feel, and whether we feel we have the resources or ways to manage the stress. So it's typically gradual and it happens over time, and it's often described as a general state of severe fatigue, and oftentimes hard to recognize in ourselves and easier to recognize in others. So this brings me to this question about stress. Is your job stressful? We actually have a couple more polls for you to answer related to this question. The first poll: what are some of the causes of stress in your job right now? And then the second question: what are some of the effects? What are some of the things that happen because of the stress? So new demands, COVID and remote delivery, unpredictability, limited resources. There's a global pandemic, paperwork, clients in crisis, high expectations, suicidal risk assessments during COVID, changing policies, helping out other offices and doing my own work. And don't forget the second question: what are some of the effects? Being less efficient. I worry can't get to all the students who need help. Frustration, exhaustion, feeling bitter. Frustration, access to resources is difficult. Tension in shoulders, overeating, breathing shallowly. Difficulty sleeping. Demoralization, distracted. Frustration, stress, unable to decompress, being at home, working from home. Anxiety, high blood sugar. So thank you everybody for participating in these polls. And another example of how the things that we're experiencing often can feel isolated, because we don't often react or respond outwardly to these sort of things that we're dealing with. We respond inwardly, meaning when we ask someone how they're doing, generally speaking, the norm is to say I'm doing fine or I'm doing well, because the thought is the other person really doesn't want to know if you're having a challenging time or a difficult time, right? And because most people respond that they're doing fine, they're doing well, then when I'm not doing well, it makes me feel like I'm isolated or alone. Well, here you can see yet again another example of how none of us are alone in what we are actually experiencing, especially due to these issues of compassion fatigue. So these are some of the things that I have listed that we talk about, some of the things that you all listed in terms of causes of our stress, whether that's documentation, conflict, staffing, personality issues, etc. In addition, these are some of the effects that I have listed. It could be drinking, loss of sleep, hypervigilance, anxiety, diminished worth, etc. Well, what if I were to tell you that these causes don't give you these effects? As long As we believe that these are the causes, then they will continue to be the causes of our stress, and we will continue to have these effects. It's my belief that in this cause and effect relationship, it's actually a major factor in why we experience these effects. So, for example, a difficult or angry patient causes stress because it threatens us in regards to how we manage and help the person. Or another example, a shortage of staff threatens us in not being able to get our work done well or effectively. So there must be an alternative explanation. There is, and we will get to it. But the point is that it's more important for everyone to begin to recognize that stress is not the events listed, but stress is our individual perceptions of those events. Hence, it's our past learning about things that we think of as causes of our stress that makes us perceive that these are causes of our stress, which moves us to sort of this sympathetic dominance, which gives us these effects. I should be on this side, which gives us these effects in terms of how we respond to it or how it manifests physiologically within our lives. It's okay if this isn't clear yet. Hold on to it. I'll get there in just a moment. So this is what it looks like when we think about the burnout cycle. When we are constantly perceiving threats and entering that state of sympathetic dominance, then we are continuously tense and anxious, and it ends in burnout. Remember, the stressors we listed as causes of stress are the perceptual threats or triggers that start the cycle. The real issue is that we have trouble separating our real demands from our perceived demands. So, for example, trying to keep a patient happy when she is dissatisfied with everything. What might our perceived demand be then? To make her happy or to make her satisfied? But is that a real demand on us? Do we actually have the capacity to make her or anyone happy for that matter? No, the answer is no, we don't. All we can do is provide the best care that we can. And I just want to reiterate that most burnout is about perception. So that brings me to sort of the rhetorical question, do you know the ratio of real to perceived threat? Well, I don't know either, but I'm sure that it's probably 1 to a really, really, really big number. And so as we think about these stress responses, it's important to note that there's a difference in short-term stress and a life of long-term stress. An example of short-term stress might be a cold, for example. An example of more prolonged long-term stress might be refugee status or a life of poverty, for example. Additionally, the stress signaled in the amygdala is also linked to increased bone marrow activity and to inflammation in the arteries, which can cause heart attack and stroke. There's research that actually shows that it explores the links where researchers suggest a plausible biological mechanism that the amygdala triggers the bone marrow to produce extra white blood cells, which then cause the arteries to develop plaque and become inflamed. So the takeaway is that stress actually causes heart disease. Oops, went too far. Okay, so a little bit more about the stress response. Secondary traumatic stress kind of is cumulative. It accumulates over time and can develop slowly over time. So secondary traumatic stress is sort of like a frog in the pot. When you look at this image, what do you see when you see the image? Well, what happens when you put a frog in a pot of hot water? The frog jumps out immediately because the temperature is too high. What happens when you put a frog in a pot of water that's at room temperature? Well, the frog will adapt and accept that temperature. And if you turn the temperature up slowly over time, the frog will gradually adapt to the temperature as it increases and eventually cooks itself to death. This is an analogy for what happens to us when we experience burnout. Sometimes the stressors at work build up slowly over time and create this sort of frog soup, if you will. And we adapt to what we perceive as a stressful environment, and it starts to seem normal until we burn out. And so we continue to push forward through all of the stress, through all of the burnout, as if we're supporting it as part of the status quo. So in this image, it sort of shows how dis-ease, because of a sympathetic dominant nervous system, can keep us at this sort of chronic state of a threat response versus having a healthy way of managing the stress, which is through self-regulation and practicing these reframing techniques. So, for example, when we're sympathetically dominant, stressful situations get out of control and it takes much longer to get back to the baseline instead of maintaining a steady emotional state. You know, when you're constantly in these high stress modes, which are not only uncomfortable, but bad for you physically and emotionally. When we achieve parasympathetic dominance, we're able to be resilient. You have your sort of blips every now and then when stressful situations arise, but you're able to quickly bounce back to the baseline. So the goal is to be more of the bottom image of having a more parasympathetic dominance than more of a sympathetic dominant nervous system. So remember this image that I showed you before about the causes, the effects, past learning, perceived threat, and sympathetic dominance? Well, all the things that we listed as causes, these things are true factors in our work environment. At the same time, they are not the causes of our stress. They are actually our perception of events influenced by past learning. So when the events trigger a response making us feel threatened, negative physical and physiological effects then occur. So it's our own sort of past learning experiences that cause us to interpret these situations as dangerous, and prolonged and persistent activation of our sympathetic nervous system that causes us to have these effects. So every cause that we have listed in that table goes back to some painful learning experience in the past. You know, perhaps a parent or finances, having an angry patient, litigation, or witnessing somebody suffer. And this painful past experience is the cause of continuing to perceive threat even when we are not in immediate danger, and is the cause of stress in our life. This is what we have found to be the primary cause of work-related symptoms. Let me go to the comments box. I see a question. Is there going to be more about sympathetic stress later? Because I don't know what that means. So what I'm explaining is sort of our nervous system and the fight or flight response, if you will. When we are sympathetically aroused, or we have a sympathetically dominant nervous system, we are in our sort of fight or flight response. We're super vigilant, we're sort of keyed up, we are sort of anxious, we have centralized circulation within our bloodstreams, we are breathing sort of shallowly, and our lungs aren't being filled with air the way they should. It increases our obsession compulsion behavior, and it decreases our prefrontal lobe, the part of our brain that helps us to think of consequences of our actions, to problem solve. It also can impact our ability to speak in our language. That's what I'm talking about when I say sympathetic dominance, okay? And what we're actually talking about is how to move from this sort of sympathetic dominant nervous system to a parasympathetic dominant nervous system, where we're regaining that neocortical functioning of our brain and able to move forward more in line with our moral code. Hopefully that helps somewhat, Marissa, with the answering of your question. Okay, good. I'm glad it was very helpful. Okay, so these are some of the tools that we will use and that I'll go over today in terms of resilience techniques. These are sort of skills that are listed in order of potency, meaning that self-regulation is the most important one, which is why we're going to practice it again today. We practiced it last week, and we'll practice it again next week. But then we'll also focus on reframing. Both of these skills or techniques may be new to you, and they may take quite a bit of practice before you feel like you've mastered these skills. But the main goal, the aim, is for relaxed joyfulness to be your natural state of being. So like I said, self-regulation is the most important, because if we are sympathetically aroused, we have a fast heart rate, muscle tension, breathing fast, feeling scared, a lot of the things that you all listed as effects when we did that poll, then it's hard for us to think clearly, and that's why, again, self-regulation is always the first and most important step. Because if I can't self-regulate, it'll be kind of hard for me to practice at reframing. All right, so let's practice some self-regulation, the first resiliency skill for preventing or managing compassion fatigue. So learning to relax shifts your body from sympathetic dominance to parasympathetic dominance. And when you relax the muscles in your pelvic floor, you release pressure on the vagus nerve, allowing it to function. All of us have a vagus nerve that goes from the brain all the way down to our pelvic floor. And this relaxation method, along with others that we've discussed last week and will continue to discuss, has the benefit of being something that you can do to self-regulate while remaining engaged in your work. So it doesn't take a lot of time to do, and you can actually self-regulate even while you're with a client, for example. It takes just a few seconds to switch sort of from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance, especially if you practice some of these exercises. So pelvic floor relaxation and other methods can be done quickly during times when you perceive a threat, which is a source of stress. And with practice, you can perform this exercise throughout the day to manage stressful events. So for example, when you are about to enter the room of an angry patient, or have a difficult discussion with a supervisor, or face a change in work assignment when staffing is low, do this exercise. When we relax and self-regulate, we relieve the pressure on the vagus nerve, and the parasympathetic system takes over. This allows the body to do its job effectively. Self-regulation requires you to be mindful of your body when we begin to tense under stress. So here's a good thing too about this slide. If you download the slides, these 5 sources that you see at the bottom of the slide are studies that actually prove that you can regain your neocortical functioning in about 20 to 30 seconds. And it's impossible, actually, to experience stress when you are in a comfortable state of being in your own skin. So if you want to prevent from feeling stress, practice self-regulation and continue to practice it. And you'll regain that neocortical functioning within seconds. So let's practice this very simple exercise. And the reason that I'm sharing a new one for you today is because last week you may not have attended, and we need to share several because some work better for some. Some exercises work better for me than they will for you, and vice versa. All right? So I invite you to have a seat if you're not seated, and plant your feet firmly on the floor, And maybe if you have a backrest, allow yourself to lean back in your chair. What I want you to do now is sit on your hands and feel the bony points against your hands. You feel the two bony points. If you have a lot of junk in your trunk like I do, you might have to rock from side to side a little bit just so that you can identify those points. Next, what I want you to do is touch the two bony points on your hips, on your right and your left side, just below the waist. Now, as you move your hands, what I want you to do is think about this sort of sensory memory, this touch memory that you just created of those 4 touch points that form sort of a square plane. This plane is where the pelvic floor muscles exist. What I want you to do is close your eyes and imagine the plane between those 4 points. And what I want you to do is relax your pelvic floor and imagine those 4 points sort of spreading and allowing your pelvic floor to widen. And I want you to practice this for about 20 seconds. Try relaxing the pelvic muscle within the plane. Just relax, relax, relax. Good job. You want to keep repeating this exercise. You may need to sit on your hands again and touch the 2 points of your hips again, and just imagine those muscles spreading. You should feel yourself start to sort of sink into your seat and allowing those muscles to relax. What you're doing is practicing self-regulation and relaxing the vagus nerve so that you can move from a sympathetic dominance to more of a parasympathetic dominance. So that brings me to the question, who is squeezing the muscles in your body? The answer is you. You are squeezing the muscles in your body. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're squeezing the muscles that we're squeezing. So what I want you to do is stop. Stop squeezing the muscles in your body. Another thing that you can try doing, it's an exercise that they do within Yoga Nidra, doing yoga at home, like following a coach virtually, is if you lay on the floor and slowly squeeze all of your muscles, then relax everything all at once, you can actually feel the tension leave your body and you will be practicing self-regulation. If you need more information on relaxing, then you can try accessing a link. Joanne, if you could put that first link in the comments box. This will link you to an article that talks about 25 ways that you can relax that don't cost a cent. Just a resource for you, and feel free to share that resource with others. Another thing that you can do if you attended last week, you will remember these images. Another thing that you can do is practice diaphragmatic breathing. And if you don't remember from diaphragmatic breathing, if you weren't here last week, looking at the images on the screen, if you lock your hands, your fingers of your hands, and just put them behind your head, this will make you start to breathe more deeply from the diaphragm, and it's actually a practice in self-regulation. I'm participating in a 10K a day wellness activity at my job, and I was walking with a colleague, we're on the same team, and she was talking about stress, and so I asked her to just lock her fingers, and put them behind her head while she walked. And as we did that together, we both started to breathe more deeply and became more relaxed in our bodies. Both of these are activities that you can do to practice self-regulation. The second resource is a YouTube video. Thank you, Joanne, for posting that. And this is actually helpful for explaining to young kids how to breathe from their diaphragm. It's a Sesame Street sort of video with Elmo in it, and it's called Belly Breathe. Okay, so it's something that I encourage you, if you have children, to maybe watch it with children to help them practice learning early about self-regulation before they even have the language. Okay, so healing from compassion fatigue. We're now about to move into talking about the reframing aspect and how we can use that to prevent compassion fatigue and alleviate it. So often sort of a immature response to perceived threat is avoidance. Remember that fight or flight response, it's the flight aspect of it. Well, a more adult response is to have a more of a mature response, I should say, is to realize that the only thing we can change is ourselves, our reactions, and our response. So that's why I have this quote, and I shared it last week. When the pain of staying the same is greater than the fear of change, we will change. So what I'm going through around reframing isn't just for those who need it, but it's actually for those who want it. And if what you are doing right now to alleviate your pain, and if that's working for you, then I encourage you to continue doing what you're doing. At the same time, if you have suffered long enough, you may want to be willing to listen to what I have to share with you so that you can practice these skills to move towards change. If we don't learn to transform our pain, then we will surely transmit it onto others, especially those that we love. So, the two important components of dealing with compassion fatigue are self-regulation, which we've already practiced, and changing our perceptions. The first step to changing our perception is actually correcting our perceptions. So here you can see on the screen 4 different principles, and I'll read them aloud to you as you read along silently. The first one, the outcomes of your work do not determine your worth as a human being. You can even read this out loud to yourself as I read it out loud to you. The second one, because you are a professional caregiver, you are entitled to nothing beyond the opportunity to engage your covenant and practice your principles. The third one, your workplace is for practicing your covenant and your code of honor, period. The fourth one, your workplace is always going to demand more from you than you can give, and never be satisfied with what you have to offer. So I want you to let these sort of thoughts marinate as I give you some more things to think about. When we talk about the outcomes of our work, the truth of the matter is that we cannot control the outcomes of our work. We do not have the power to heal our patients. We do not have the power to fix the behaviors of others. We do not have the power to make other people happy. What we have the power to do is control our own work and our own actions. We can only do the best that we can do with what we have to offer. So we are all part of a team working to achieve outcomes, but it is a shared responsibility. You do not control the outcomes of your work, you only control the process. We may aim towards outcomes, but we work with principles. So what you do control is your process that you take for completing your work. In terms of the second one, being a professional caregiver, you're only entitled to practicing your covenant and your principles. If you believe yourself to be entitled to something and you don't get it, then you will see yourself as a victim. Victimization traps us into feeling underappreciated, undervalued, and adding to the vicious cycle of the stress response. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to see ourselves as victims because your work is your opportunity to practice your code of honor, your covenant with yourself, period. It's your responsibility to be true to yourself and your own personal and professional integrity. That was addressing actually the third one. Now, the fourth one that talks about your workplace always wanting more from you than you have to give and never being satisfied with what you have to offer. Well, this is something that happens often in healthcare, which is a 24-hour business. And there are always going to be short shifts, emotional and difficult patients, unexpected emergencies, etc. There will always be times when we can't possibly do everything that we are asked to do. And this isn't just true for us in healthcare, this is true for any workplace. And part of our professional maturation is moving away from just reacting to demands and moving towards choice, towards intentional actions. Knowing that our best is good enough is very important. And again, if what you're doing right now is working, then stick with what you're doing. If not, at least be open to changing the way you look at things. Okay. Thank you for that, Cesar. So, if the problem is compassion fatigue, which is a condition characterized by a gradual lessening of compassion over time, then the solution is the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful again after something bad happens. This is our aim. This is our goal. So now what I want to do is invite you to watch another video before you click on the image or the button to watch the video. Just listen to me for a second. The history of the vignette that you're about to watch is actually, it was created after Dr. Eric Gentry, J. Eric Gentry. Dr. Gentry is my compassion fatigue resilience guru. He's my sensei. He's my compassion fatigue resilience coach. He is who trained me in compassion fatigue resilience, which is why I said you could credit him for anything that I share with you all today. You can also credit Born and our back. Hopefully you got a lot out of that video. Thank you, Betty, for reiterating the quote, "Good enough today." Right? That is a great perspective that she had. And I think that it's important for us to be very mindful that we are all doing the very best that we can to be the best versions of ourselves each day, despite all of the baggage that we have carrying with us from our personal lives and our lived experiences and things like that. So thank you for watching the video. So in addition to that, when we talk about shifting perception, it's important for us to think about how to intentionally change our perception of the environment in which we are working. This quote that you see, "Change the way you look at things and the things you look at change," is from Wayne Dyer. He's a self-help author and motivational speaker. In life, what we look at is not nearly as important as how we look at it. Our perception of the world is what creates our life experience. So ask yourself, is your current perception somewhat skewed and therefore not true at all? And can you change your perception? Although we might want things to be different from what they are, resilience arises from acceptance of the world as it is and focusing instead on what meaning we can make of it for ourselves. We have to redirect our thinking in a more positive and mindful way. Letting things in our environment stress us out is allowing for an external locus of control when we want to have more of an internal locus of control. We want to switch from having our mind filled with an overload of thoughts, sensations, perceptions to one of a quiet focus. Being mindful of the moment will allow us to deal with stress in a more positive way. One thing that I like to do is an Energizer, and you can do it with me if you want to. It'll only take a couple seconds. It's an Energizer and it helps with reframing. If you take your finger and point it in the air, look up and begin to make a clockwise circle. As you're making this clockwise circle with your finger, bring it down to eye level. Keep looking at it. Now bring it down to chest level and keep looking at it. Now you should see the circle going counterclockwise instead of clockwise. Again, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at can change. So intentionality actually allows you to be mission-driven and principle-based. Once you switch emotionally to better perceptual awareness, you want to think about what are the principles that got me to where I am today. What is my moral code? You want to go or perform an act or make a decision in the direction where your principles and values are intact. Living with fidelity to our purpose and in alignment with our principles is equally important in developing and maintaining our professional quality of life. Trauma makes us fearful, and being fearful, we mistrust each other. Mistrust then leads to anger, and then we find ourselves violating our own values, the same ones that brought us to healthcare or to our professions in the first place. So, for the first activity that I invite you to do, it's called the Dear Supervisor email or text. At any point throughout your day, you can write yourself an email, send yourself a text message, or even write yourself a quick note and put it in your pocket and pull it out later. And pretend that you are that great supervisor, the great supervisor within you that sees all of the great things that you do and gives you praise for it. All of the things that you do within your role, or even if it were things that you did already today. What I invite you to do right now is think of at least 2 things that you did today that you are proud of, and allow that great supervisor within you to give you credit for each of them. In fact, I invite you to share what 2 of those things are in the comments box right now. In fact, I'm going to give you 1 minute to share, and think about how you feel as you type these things into the comments box, and as you read the comments that others make, think about how you feel as well. You have 1 minute. Share 2 things that you're proud of yourself for doing today, specifically in your role at work. And you may begin now. I'm reading all of them. These are great. I'm proud of all of you as well for doing these things. You have about 15 seconds left to complete. Okay, thank you to everybody who participated in that activity. For your own usage later, you can download the Great Supervisor worksheet or handout. It's again at the bottom left corner, and you can spend time actually creating and writing a full letter to yourself as if you were your own great supervisor. This is all about self-validation. Oftentimes we're looking for validation in others, but we actually don't need validation from others because we can validate ourselves. So with this next activity, what I want you to think about is this question. What is the promise that I made to myself when I accepted the role that I have in healthcare? Every role that you have in life, including your job, is an opportunity for you to practice that promise that you made to yourself. How you choose to show up during an encounter, how you choose to perform within your formal role at work, or even if you are a parent, a mentor, or a coach, all of your roles are your opportunities to practice your promise to yourself. Your job is your opportunity to practice that promise and to get paid for it. So, for example, one of the promises that I've made to myself is that I promise to promote the value of saving lives and eliminating excess death. I also promise myself to do my work as thoroughly as I can and to practice self-compassion while I do it. So what I want to invite you to do is to share a promise statement with the rest of the group by putting it in the comments box. In fact, I have these stems for you that you can use to begin creating a promise statement. In fact, at any point throughout your workday, you can take a moment and write yourself a text, send yourself an email, or even write a promise statement in your pocket, on a piece of paper and put it in your pocket. And in those moments when you're starting to feel sympathetic arousal, remind yourself of your promise that you made to yourself. Pull it out your pocket or out your phone, okay? Now go ahead and create your promise statements now and share them in the comment box. And think about how you feel as you share your promise statement. And think about how you feel as others share theirs. You have 1 minute. You may begin now. You have about 30 more seconds to contribute a promise statement. These are some great promises, everyone. It's actually making me feel very warm inside. Okay, if you're still typing, that's fine. Go ahead and complete your promise statement. It may be, sometimes for me, I have to think a little bit longer before I can just start typing. And that's completely okay for this process as well. At the same time, we're going to move forward. So, when thinking about reframing, again, remember that we're all just trying to be loyal to our values, even when we can't control the outcomes. And sometimes that stress can cause conflict with our principles and our values, but the idea is to create more of a sense of independence and power so that we have more of an internal locus of control. When you change from what is outside of yourself to what is inside, then you can better respond to stress in a way that is in line with your values. And don't forget that we are each living according to our values and doing the best that we can to be the best version of ourselves each day. So I always share the Clara method when I deliver a presentation, because as you practice the Clara method, you're actually practicing compassion, fatigue, resilience in the fact that when you do the first step of calming yourself, finding your center, checking your pulse, taking a deep breath, you're actually practicing self-regulation. And when you practice self-regulation, you regain that neocortical functioning. Keep in mind that the activities that we just did, the promise to myself activity or the dear supervisor email or text, those are things that can be done in a matter of seconds. You don't have to take a whole lot of time to do them, or you can take time in your personal time and actually complete a full sort of covenant promise activity. So in the handouts, there's also a covenant exercise that you can use to create a draft of a promise letter or statement that you can write to yourself. But as you practice the CLARE method, self-regulation is what helps us to find our center so that we can then regain that neocortical functioning, which helps us to better listen actively to the other person's perception of the problem and helps us to think and use compassion as we give an affirming statement to affirm some component of the speaker's perspective or to see a piece of their humanity or affirm a piece of the truth that they have to share. And we do these 3 steps before we respond to what was said and add information to the response in a way that moves the discussion forward. And when we affirm the other person, it's also important that we don't use words like but or fancy buts like however, that said, nevertheless. And instead use words like and or in addition or also or at the same time. You will have noticed that during my presentation, I often say at the same time. Rarely will you hear me say but or nevertheless or any of the other fancy buts. So as we are coming to the end of the presentation and before we get into questions and answers, could you all please just share in the chat box what questions, I'm sorry, in the questions box, what questions you may have that I can answer. Sorry, I thought we were doing a different part, but we're actually at the questions part. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the questions box. Okay, no questions at the moment. Thanks, Matthew. See a couple of other people typing, so I'll pause for a moment to see if they have questions. You're welcome, Wendy. I'm glad you love these presentations. Feel free to just be as blunt as you need to without having to, well, I did ask you to use your filters and be intentional about what you say. So scratch that. Don't be blunt. Use your filters. Let's see. How do you contact me for permission to use some of the slides for presenting to teachers? I will share my email address at the end, but actually I can share with you my email address now. Feel free to shoot me an email at my work email, and I'll respond to you as soon as I can. Once folks are experiencing high burnout / compassion fatigue, what helps to get buy-in to practice self-regulation and change the culture of the team? Very good question, Benjamin. What I think helps, what I try to do is I try to model for people before I try to present to them a skill or something to use. All of us have a story. In fact, many of us, if not all of us, will experience the symptoms of compassion fatigue, if we haven't already, during some point throughout our career. And because of that, it's important to be able to model by sharing your story with others as well. What I tend to do is share my background as a caregiver and how I started to experience symptoms of compassion fatigue. And then after learning and practicing self-regulation techniques, how that has had a huge impact on my ability to find joy in the work that I do. And so I think that that's the best tool that I use when I try to explain to somebody how to practice self-regulation. I use myself as a testimony, if you will, to model for them and to share with them how it has been effective for me. I see somebody else typing, so I'll pause just to give them an opportunity to finish their question. In fact, while they are doing that, I want to also invite you all to complete the professional quality of life measurement tool again, but using ProQual 2 in the handouts. It's the same questions that you did in the beginning, except ProQual 2 actually has a scoring sheet for you to use to score yourself as it relates to compassion, satisfaction, burnout, and secondary traumatic stress, as well as an interpretation of how to interpret the tool and your scores. This is helpful information for you so that you can use it for yourself. In fact, if you participated last week, you did it before and after each session. And if you come again next week, you'll get an opportunity to again do it before and after each session. And what I encourage you to do is compare your scores each of the weeks and see if they changed at all. And then maybe even take it again in 30 days after you've had some time to practice some of the techniques that we go over, and just monitor for yourself how your scores may have shifted up or down as it relates to compassion, satisfaction, burnout, and secondary traumatic stress. Okay, Ayana, I see your question. What about if you are still experiencing burnout? How do we know when it's just time for a break? That's a good question. I think that at any point where you are feeling burned out or you're starting to feel sympathetic arousal on a constant basis, that's a good warning sign for you to go ahead and take a break. In fact, I encourage you to take breaks or vacations even when you're not feeling sympathetic arousal, because that'll help you to prevent from feeling that way. It's important to take breaks or vacations every year for an extended amount of time, and not take a vacation time to use it to do other work either. It's important that we take breaks, that we take vacation time, that we take care of ourselves, because unless we're taking good care of ourselves, it's impossible for us to take good care of others. I hope that was helpful in answering the question. I'm reading some of the comments. Sometimes as acute care workers, we don't have a lot of time to model these practices, and there are limited counseling opportunities for people who are stuck in chronic mode. These exercises are great, but sometimes the issue is much deeper. I agree. And these exercises, I don't think, are going to be effective if someone is actually experiencing clinical levels of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which many of us do experience as a result of the toxic environment of our work. If that's the situation, then I would say encourage individuals to use whatever EAP program that you may have, or try to seek or offer resources for professional counseling, because these activities are meant to sort of help manage compassion fatigue, which is not a disease, right? At the same time, if someone's experiencing PTSD, then perhaps more strategic, targeted interventions may be necessary. Okay, so if you could also share in the comment box, what is one action you will take as a result of this webinar? You're welcome, Ruth. Wendy, I see you asked, what is my role at the hospital? While people are answering the actions that they're taking, and these are great actions as I'm looking at them, and thank you for answering the question, everybody. My formal title is Assistant Director of Inclusion and Training. I actually coordinate and manage the hospital's cultural competence training strategy. And because of my background and experience, I've also been a part of the disaster recovery team that was created after COVID-19, which majority of the members of the team are from our psychiatry and neuroscience department. Dr. Royce Lee is sort of the chair of the team, and he once said that if anyone deserves a an honorary degree in psychology or psychiatry, it's me. I guess because of the amount of experience that I have. And because of that, I've also been asked to help the hospital with its resilience-based care initiatives, which relate to what we teach on compassion, fatigue, resilience, as well as trauma-informed care. Thank you, everybody, for participating and answering the question and attending today's session. And I am now going to turn it over to Tiara, who's going to give you some final remarks. And here again is my information. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have follow-up questions or aha moments or thoughts that you want to share with me. And I see all of the thank yous in the comment box. You are absolutely welcome. I love being a part of these presentations and getting the opportunity to present to all of you. Tiara, take it away.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. I know I got a lot of value out of it. I've been reading the comments. I see a lot of our participants have gotten a lot of value out of it. Really appreciate your practical tips for things we can do in the moment. I love attending these things and appreciate you for being here. I would also like to thank you, and thank everyone for attending. Appreciate you guys being here. We're going to talk about some of our upcoming learning opportunities as well. You'll see here, Joel has another, it's the third part of this series. It's next week, same time, same place. See you here, hopefully. There's a link there to register as well. If you ever miss a webinar or just don't have a chance to catch it, please know that we do post the webinars to our website. We ask that you allow 7 to 10 business days for them to get up on the site, but you'll see the link there where you can click and check out some of our offerings. A certificate of completion will automatically be sent to all the participants. However, if you join by phone, I know some folks mentioned there was tech issues. Please email Joanne so that she can record your participation, and we'll get you your certificate that way. Her email is there on the screen. It's joshel, JOSHEL @cars-rp.org. For folks who are interested in getting continuing education hours, that is also available. There's a $25 processing fee for that. At the end here, you will be directed to an evaluation. As soon as you complete the evaluation, that screen will pop up automatically for you. So if you are interested in the CEUs, please just stick around for that for that form after the eval. Here's our contact information. If you need more information or just have any general inquiries, our email is here on the screen, our website, and also we're on social media. So feel free to look us up on Twitter, Instagram, as well as Facebook. And again, thank you so much for attending. We really would appreciate your attention in the evaluation piece that's going to come up here shortly. It helps us curate this experience for you, to come up with webinar offerings, and also allows us to receive some feedback about our process.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you again for attending.